evening. Thank you for making time for us on the big story on this 15th day of October. My name is Michelle Ngele Oviambo. Tonight, it is nearly 7 years since the infamous Syokimau demolitions took place on a piece of land that the government said was a flight path. Despite a court order stopping the demolition, the bulldozers pounced on the palatial home just days before the court ruled on a case pitting the owners of the homes against the Kenya Airports Authority. Families lost their entire life savings in the demolitions. A similar scenario is playing out in Nairobi's high-rise area, where NEMA and the Water Resources Management Authority have earmarked Seefer Apartments for demolition. The environment watchdogs say the building was built on the riparian land of the Nairobi Dam and wanted it demolished in the next 10 days. The 14-day notice of demolition issued last week was extended today by 30 more days to allow for fresh assessment of the location of the apartments. The three-block apartment has 288 units and 287 families live there. About 1,000 people will be in the cold if the building is demolished, just like the Syokimau homeowners. Those at Seefer Apartments followed the law to the letter in acquiring the homes. So who duped these homeowners? Is it the developer, or was the developer duped by NEMA officials who gave them clearance to put up the structure back in 2015? Are these the kind of officers President Uhuru Kenyatta was alluding to in this particular video?
That we must clean up our act. We are now in the process, as he has said, of demolishing properties that have been built on riparian land. We will continue to do so. But equally, for those who made the approvals, we are not just going to punish those who built, because I know in many instances, many of them are claiming they were given permits. Well, those permits and whatever they were given illegally, but they were given by government officers. So I want to assure you that we are going after all those who issued those permits. Those ones will be prosecuted.
All the officers the president is referring to are awash with impunity. And when the demolitions in Nairobi began in early August this year, they were making calls seeking protection. Listen in to what they had to say.
Because I've been receiving so many calls that, you know, how can you just sit there and watch all this destruction going on? You must stop it. And I said, well, it's difficult to stop. It's difficult to stop not because we love to destroy, but because we must fight impunity. Because if we fail to fight impunity, we will not achieve our dreams. And a time has come for us to fight impunity. A time has come for every Kenyan to realize, no matter how powerful you think you are, no matter how much you think you know people in high position, no matter how much money you have, that will not save you. That will not save you.
On the show tonight, I shall be speaking to Seefer Flats homeowner chairman Peter Otieno, environment lawyer Frank Walukwe, Kenya Alliance of Resident Associations CEO Henry Ochieng, as well as Amina Mahamood, a real estate consultant with Rama Homes. She'll be joining us live from the show, on the show from our city center studios. But before we bring in our super panel tonight, let's cross over to our lead reporter, Sophia Nuna, for more on this developing story. Sophia, good evening. 30 more days there for the demolition orders for Seefer Apartments, but that does not offer reprieve for the homeowners there, as well as the owners of 1,000 other buildings earmarked for demolition. Who's duping you in this issue?
Indeed, good evening, Michelle. It's one of those issues that places the government in what would call a rock, between a rock and a hard place. We've had the president there coming out strongly to say that whilst it may cause pain, it might be tough, but it must be done to fight impunity. But many of these owners of this development buildings or whether it's malls or houses, apartments, have come out to argue that they followed due process. They have every requisite document, approval, and even certificate of clearance to move in and settle and conduct business. So that when you look at this at the end of the day, they see it as, on one hand, a government that gives a clean bill of health. In the Seefer Apartments scenario, we see Edelman developers came in, put these apartments. They now, of course, have sold them out to largely the owners now of the property. They hold and own a very little percentage of that property. But at the time, this was opened and commissioned by the then CS Housing, Soita Shitanda, so that when you see a government minister come and say, this is officially open for business at a time the Uhuru Kenyatta government is talking about housing as a big four agenda, that is the strongest sense of confidence anyone would get to move in. So that when a few years later then that turns around and there are questions around, is this on riparian land, it's concerning, it's disconcerting. And of course, one of the issues that sticks out, that notice of evacuation for this people to move and demolition as well, remember, was a handwritten notice without any stamp. I spoke earlier to the Nairobi County Governor. He says, according to the map they have, this property sits 150 meters away from the dam. Now that is 120 meters safe from that 30 meters, which is the danger zone of a property in riparian land. However, he argues then the concerned and, of course, the entities in terms of government, NEMA, WARMA, should then get to the ground, do renew measurements or whatever it is that needs to happen to establish the real area and issue at hand right now. But some still read ill motive in this new and also call for these people to leave their property for demolition of the Seefer Towers. But let me speak with a man who perhaps understands much more in terms of legal implications of this and how, even as a country, not only with this particular demolition we might be witnessing in the near future, but the others we've seen and the calls, the cries from the owners, but a government adamant that this must be done for riparian land, for land that is reserved for development as well. The executive director of the Institute for Law, that is on issues of environmental and governance, he's Benson Ocheng. He's been on the show before, and thank you for joining us tonight. This is one of those issues that has confused many people. They hear all manner of different perspectives, Mr. Ocheng. What is the issue in your view?
Well, the issue is simply that we don't have a clear legal position on this matter. We have various laws that all speak different language when it comes to the issue of riparian rights. The second thing is that I think we are misapplying the whole idea of riparian rights to extend it to deal with an issue that is essentially a development planning issue. And I think it is trying to stretch the concept too far. In the case of a man-made dam, the law relating to riparian land, or the traditional use of the term, does not really apply. Riparian means contiguous to a natural water source, mainly in the context of a river. And the idea of a riparian right is to protect people who need access to the waters of a river in the right quantity and quality for their domestic or other industrial usages. The most important thing about it is that that water should be preserved with its integrity for the use of all who need it for that purpose. But in our situation, I think it is an important issue for development planning when we are talking in the context of what we see happening, particularly during heavy rains, or when we are talking of the need to plan our city well. Yeah. But I think the fact that we don't have clear legal position, we have several sets of laws talking all different things. And I'm sure even if you ask the authorities who are demolishing these structures, they will not be able to pinpoint and lay their fingers on where they are drawing their authority, from which law they are drawing their authority. And let me just give you an example. The first and most important legislation regarding this matter is the Physical Planning Act of 1996. And that law states basically the position only with respect to survey of government land, what we currently call under the 2010 Constitution the public land. And it simply admonishes or advises that where survey is done or subdivision is done of land belonging to the government, you leave a 30-meter reserve from the point of, from the water source to the point where you are now to start subdivision. Yeah. This reserve is left for government purposes. Ideally, the whole point is that people can access it, the public can access it for use, maybe recreational purposes and other things, for general use. And also, of course, then you see where we are coming from. Now, if you go to the Agriculture Act, the refrain is simply that you leave 2 meters when you are cultivating land that is next to a water source. Again, the Agriculture Act was repealed in 2016, but essentially the regulations that were made under it still apply. We have another important law, which is the overall legislation regarding environmental matters. We call it Framework Law, the 1999 Environment Management and Coordination Act, otherwise popularly called EMCA. Now, this law has recently been amended in 2015, but the main provision regarding riparian land is drawn from Section 42, under which regulations were made to regulate how close you could move to a source of water. Okay. And that law, which we call our parent environmental law, simply states that wherever you are dealing with the land next to a water source, you are supposed to leave between 6 meters and 30 meters reserve land from the highest watermark. Yeah. The point here is that we must know the highest watermark in this regard, and we don't have those records. No surveys have been done, and this has not been recorded, which means that it is then left to the design of the authority or the person applying the law to tell from where they are going to start that measurement. Yeah. So the whole area of riparian law is very confused, and there is no certainty in how to deal with it. I think it is at this point that we just need to draw a line and say mistakes have been done in the past, we've not had a proper legal position, and Parliament then has a responsibility to put this matter squarely on the table for debate and decide how we are going to deal with this monumental issue. Yes,
because what we appear to be having is a government with its institutions cannibalizing itself in as far as Ajo's saying, the legal position on how to canvass these issues, but the person who feels the pain, the pinch is ordinary mwananchi, the investors who come in place every other day. So what becomes their recourse? Do you see a scenario where a few years from now, government will be paying a lot in compensation of these demolitions that are taking place?
Well, one can envisage that. What is happening right now cannot stand the test of legal probity at all, because all these people have been able to bring licenses or papers that show that whatever they did according to the law. And it is very difficult to, it is so easy to envisage this being abused to settle political scores. In fact, even the manner that is being done sometimes leaves you wondering whether somebody simply wants to get political mileage out of it. The truth of the matter is, if all the approvals were acquired according to law, it then means it's a matter of time when the current administration goes out of, let's say, office. It is very easy for somebody to claim, basically saying, yeah, we did it, and or we have all the papers, and therefore we are going to enforce our legal rights, because it will be very difficult to stop them in future as long as they can demonstrate that these approvals were actually done according to law. Right. So the truth of the matter is, I think sense needs to prevail, so that we really examine this issue against the backdrop of the dangers posed by these particular buildings, because in many cases, the people demolishing them have not even been able to demonstrate clearly that these are the source or the actual points where the problem really arises. So I think we need to sober up in the manner that we are doing these things. I think the system is very much prone to political abuse, and I think people could be settling political scores. Yeah. The most important thing is that we should go down and research where the problem really lies in terms of these structures. We need to appreciate that serious investments were made by individuals. We need to appreciate that in many cases, these people obeyed the law, at least as it stands. But where they did not obey the law, it is clear that the law is not settled and we have different laws talking different things, and it is very difficult to determine with certainty where the dice should be cast in this particular regard.
Finally, break it down for our viewers, because you don't just wake up, see a piece of land and develop. There's a long process. There's approvals from numerous various entities, institutions, government agencies that one must get approval. And even during the development project or whatever it is, housing, there's still that monitoring until there's that certification of occupation. So that when somebody then comes back to say, okay, this is wrong, one wonders what on earth was happening all this while.
Remember that all these are government institutions. These licenses and approval are gotten from authorities which are legally mandated to issue them. Yes. And there are officers who live on taxpayers' money just to do that job. In many cases, they have reviewed the situation according to the developer's plan. Of course, we can't outrule the possibility that maybe there could be underhand dealings in some situations. But the fact that it went through all the process to acquire all these papers and licenses, and it is something that is not just done overnight. Development takes time. Some of these structures takes years to put up. So it is very disheartening, really, and worrying to see that you wake up in the morning and you find bulldozers have gutted down your property worth billions of shillings, and the person doing it cannot with certainty tell you that this is the authority, this is the law that we are using. And in any event, a lot of those who are involved in the demolitions actually issued the licenses. We are dealing with institutions, we are not dealing with individuals. Otherwise, the issue of succession and authority of the institutions cannot apply. So that is why I keep emphasizing, we need to sober up, we need to draw a line, we need to investigate where the problems really lie, and just say, okay, mistakes were done, agree on how best to deal with that situation, if people can be compensated for the loss of their property. If moving forward from that line onwards, we will ensure that we stick to clearly defined rules of procedure and terms of approval of structures, then we will be on the path to resolving this problem. Otherwise, we are doing it today, the next day we will be incurring very high cost to compensate those individuals who have lost the property at taxpayers' expense. And who knows, it could be a system that could easily be abused even in future, so that we will be in a vicious cycle of approvals and settling political scores, and we will never get anywhere if we proceed in that manner.
All right. Well said. Thank you very much. Benson Ocheng, Executive Director, ILEG, and Michelle has handed back to you. We have seen demolitions, various buildings in different parts, especially of Nairobi County. But as much as the President has talked about even those in government who will be found culpable being held accountable and brought to book, that hasn't happened yet. So it could mean the same people who approved these buildings, if in fact they're those who acted ulterior motives, corruption, impunity, they're still doing it today. So this is a vicious cycle, and we hope some way, somehow, it will all be resolved, Michelle.
Absolutely, and of course, a very stern warning there from President Uhuru Kenyatta. That is our lead reporter, Sophia Onuna, on the shore tonight. Like I mentioned, I will be speaking to Seefer Flats homeowners Chairman Peter Otieno. I'll also be speaking to environment lawyer Frank Waluka to break down the various legislation surrounding riparian land in the country. I also have the Kenya Alliance of Residents Association CEO Henry Ochieng, and last but not least, Amina Mahamood, who is a real estate consultant with Rama Homes. Let's begin with you, Amina. Many thanks for joining us on the big story tonight. As a developer, what is the process? Briefly take us through the process of putting up a residential building in the city.
Okay, thanks for having me. To give a brief of this process, first of all, you have to identify the land, of course. And then after that, there are this number of approvals that you start running up and down for them. For instance, I'll mention the few number of approvals that we have. I'll start with NEMA. We have NCA approval, National Construction Authorities. We have NCC, Nairobi County Council Authorities. Then we have KCAA, Kenya Civil Aviation Authorities. So basically, how this is done is that you submit your written proposals to these various entities, and with the proper documentation and proper request, and then it takes internal processing until you get all these approvals done. It's really a long process.
Said then, that's from a developer's point of view. So for homeowners then, before buying a house, what should homeowners put in mind with the developer before committing the money?
Okay, there are a couple of things. We have the key important issues. Number one, as an investor, you need to do the due diligence. You need to have a search of the title. This is very key. You need to involve legal opinion. You need to have legal representation. Then these are the key things that you need to do. Look at the transfer of ownership of that land and all that. Then we have the other small issues like your budget, the size, the location. Yeah.
Oh, well, that being said then, what other non-tariff challenges do developers face when putting up buildings in Nairobi specifically?
Okay, we have a couple of them. For starters, for example, we look at the issues the trends that are there in the market. Let's talk about factors like energy, source of energies like the solar systems. For instance, nowadays in the market we find that we have these new innovations of like the solar systems. We have lighter solar systems, beautiful panels, but then again they come at a cost. Then let's look at about heights. The Nairobi City Councils require you to put lift on a residential building that is going beyond 5 blocks. That is another cost. We have a shortage of water around the city, so you need things like boreholes. That is another cost, to mention just but a few.
And these demolitions come at a time when the recent World Bank report placed Kenya's real estate sector at number 3 continentally. How have the recent demolitions affected the property market?
This has been affecting both the developers and the investors. For instance, you find that investors are now pulling out of projects that they had started investing. Some are even fearing to take that approach. Then you look at the developers. Now you find that some of these projects are now stalling. You find that even those which are not on the riparian lands or they're not affected by this kind of demolitions, people are still scared. They don't know what the future holds. They don't know what in the next year, what will be the issue that will arise and will cause demolitions of this project. So the market has really been affected in such that people are now scared. People are not scared to invest in real estate. And then developers, they are low on sales. Yeah.
Speaking to us, that is Amina Mahmoud. She is a real estate consultant with the Rama Homes, just painting us a picture of the process needed to put up a building, a residential building in the city. Let's now bring in Peter Otieno. He is the chairman of the Seefer Flats home owners. That apartment, they are getting 30 more days in those demolition orders. Of course, a bit of reprieve there for residents of Seefer Flats, Peter. But let's talk procedure. The proprietor of Seefer Apartments said they followed the law to the letter. So how did the residents find themselves here today?
Yeah, you see, we are not the developers, so we cannot say how the documents were followed. But to the best of our knowledge, we acquired the units in that building through a legal process. All our agents did their due diligence, and you know, not very many, it's not easy to acquire a building in Nairobi and most of, in Kenya in general. So you realize that enough people were actually funded by the banks through the mortgage, And you know that for a bank to even choose to qualify you for that particular mortgage, you've got to go through some process of vetting to find out whether the property is genuine, it's something that can be financed and all that. So the other thing to note is most of the owners that we have at Seefer do not even actually know who the developer is, because they did not engage the developer at any particular moment. They bought from the first buyers or the second buyers or the third buyers. So the people who are the actual owners of the units in Seefer Apartment, they are very, very different from the people who, or from the developer himself. So even as the notice was addressed to Edelman Properties, the truth of the matter is they actually only own one unit out of the 288 units.
Right. Well, there was a meeting today between homeowners from Seefer Flats and the National Environmental and Management Authority. What came out of that meeting?
Yeah, you see, the meeting was called by the notice. The notice indicated that the person to whom the notice was addressed to, in this case, Edelman Properties, was to appear at the NEMA offices on Monday morning, and that is today morning. Now, in the interest of the whole apartment, we know that Edelman Properties only represent but a unit. And all the other owners wanted to have an understanding of why the notice was issued and the building marked, because it was affecting them directly. Some of them are residents and others have tenants there. And because of this scare, many people were contemplating leaving, but it's not easy to leave or to just relocate to another place based on the uniqueness of the building. It's a residential apartment, and that means families are there. All of us know how difficult it is to acquire a residential unit in Nairobi. You can take long to get a suitable place. All the residents, if I have to say, are very happy with the accommodation that they get there. And they were hesitant and they even doubted, is this serious? So the moment the notice came, people started calling. I received so many calls. People wanted to know what is happening. Is this real? Are they joking? What do we make out of this? And so when it came to today, all of us had to be represented fully and get to hear directly from the NEMA itself what their intention is. Part of the questions we were going to ask is, when did they do this assessment? At what point did they notice that the building is on a land that should be reserved? And how do they choose even the notices that they give? For example, 14 days. 14 days for a family, that means a lot, because it's too short a time. You cannot say that within 14 days I need to have gotten a place to live. If I have a family, I need to have relocated my children to different schools. I need to have prepared all that is required. And that would mean to people who perhaps are living in their own units, they need to maybe look for somewhere to rent. And the other thing it would mean is, does it mean they've lost their investment? But then, if that is the case, who should be responsible? Who gave the authorizations? Because according to the documents in record, all the approvals were given by the same authorities, and all these were questions that needed to be answered by by NEMA, which is the authority, one of the authorities giving the notice.
Peter Otieno is the chairman of the Seefer Flats home owners there. And this is the big story. We're going to take a short commercial break. When we come back, we'll bring in environment lawyer Frank Walukwe, as well as Henry Ochieng, who is the CEO of the Kenya Residents Alliance of Resident Associations. Where does the buck stop, rather, with these demolitions, and how will residents and Kenyans get back the investments they have put in? This is the big story. Do stay with us. More coming up in just a moment.
This is KTN News.
Bet, huge jackpots, big winnings. Achieve your best today with 200% bonus on the first deposit. All bets on sports.
One is fair.
Huge winnings.
One is fair.
High odds.
One is fair.
Fast pay.
One is fair. One is fair.
Bookmaker Company.
Win a chance to meet football legend Rio Ferdinand. Text code to 22110 plus over 50 million shillings in prizes to be won.
Land degradation is one of the world's most critical environmental challenge, affecting more than 250 million people in at least 100 vulnerable countries. In Kenya, images of drought and famine are almost synonymous with imageries of the northeastern part of the country. More than 20% of drylands have been degraded through human activities. Now, the dryland areas make up more than 83% of the country. Experts blame desertification on ecosystem variations brought by climate change and uncontrolled human activities. Population growth has also increased demand for land. Settlement in very fragile ecosystems like hilly places and riparian areas has led to loss of fertile soils. The stress of drought, famine, and deepening poverty have created social strains, stirring involuntary migration, the breakdown of communities, political instability, and armed conflict. Pastoralists now move for longer distances in search of pasture and water for their animals. Stakeholders have a challenge to save disappearing rivers that are vanishing due to siltation, stop deforestation, control effects of drought, and prevent massive land degradation.
KTN Prime Highlights in association with KCB Bank.
Na wale ambao walihusika na kufanya gharama ya uchaguzi iende juu, hata kama ni nani, hata kama ni staff, hata kama ni commissioner, hata kama ni mimi, nasema hatufai kuwa wa Kenya. Kama ulihusika, unataka uwe ndani, ukae ndani.
Arrest and prosecute those who misappropriated funds in the last general election. Chebukati now tells DCI and ESSC. Not guilty. Citizen television journalist Jackie Maribe and her fiancé Joseph Irungu plead to the murder of Monica Kimani.
He was among the people who had the benefit to go to dressing room after the match, and there was a lot of team spirit.
Harambee Stars may be heading to the African Cup of Nations after their 3-0 win over Ethiopia, but their win is now taking a political twist over the 50 million promise from Deputy President William Ruto.
It's only 50 shillings, each SMS costs 10 shillings.
These criminal elements of betting have always been there throughout, and that's partly why all over the world betting is extremely regulated.
Also tonight, it is emerging that Kenya's investigating agencies may have turned a blind eye on a mega money laundering scam spanning over 5 years, and one with an international criminal connection in Canada and in the US.
Parenting, schooling, go. Building, investing, saving, or maybe retiring.
Achieve your dreams with the KCB Gold Savings Account. Enjoy Kenya's highest earning interest rate by visiting any KCB branch today and opening a KCB Gold Savings Account. KCB Bank. Go ahead.
This is KTN News.
Tonight, it is nearly 7 years since the infamous Syokimau demolitions took place on a piece of land the government said was a flight path. Despite a court order stopping the demolition, the bulldozers pounced on the palatial homes just days before the court ruled on a court case pitting the homeowners against the Kenya Airports Authority. Families there lost their entire life savings in the demolitions. Now, a similar scenario is playing out in Nairobi's high-rise area, where NEMA and Water Resources Management Authority have earmarked Seefer Apartments for demolition. The environment watchdog says the building was built on the riparian land of the Nairobi Dam and wanted it demolished in the next 10 days. Well, that 14-day notice of demolition issued last week was extended today by 30 days to allow for fresh assessment of the location of the apartments. That block has 288 units and 287 families live there. In total, about 1,000 people will be left in the cold if the building was demolished. Many questions we're asking on the big story tonight. Let me bring in our environment lawyer, Frank Walukwe. Many thanks for joining us on the big story tonight. The law on riparian zone protection is not a single piece of legislation. In fact, we seem to have too much legislation on riparian zone protection. Break it all down for us, please.
Michelle, for having me. First and foremost, what is riparian land? That has been told to be the interface between land and a body of water, preferably a stream or a river. Now, in Kenya, that has been, with regard to this particular scenario, the dam is considered to be riparian land as far as NEMA and WAMA are concerned with regard to Seefer Apartments and the putting up of those apartments. So the question becomes, who is to blame with regard to that particular development? We need to start from the point of law that says that any action done by a government agency is considered to be legal unless it can be proven in a court of law that it was not done according to the provisions of the law. So in this particular instance, Seefer Apartments and the people who bought these particular units from the developers, Edaman, are saying that they followed the exact right procedure. With regard to NEMA, one of those procedures would be the Environment Impact Assessment, EAI. And with regard to the Environment Impact Assessment, once a prospective developer decides that they want to build either a unit, either a development that's going to take more than 30 units, or a development that is within an area that is considered riparian land, they're supposed to do an environment impact assessment study, which study is supposed to be given to NEMA, and NEMA is supposed to supervise that study being published to the people around that area, and specifically within that region, they're supposed to ensure that that study has been put in dailies, at least 2 dailies, for the people around that area. And then there's supposed to be 60 days within which the members of the public within that area are supposed to give their views with regard to that environment impact assessment study. With this particular elaborate provisions of the law, it beats logic how NEMA can now come back and say that they were not aware this building was being put up, or that this building was actually put up on riparian land, yet it's them themselves and their officers who were mandated to give licenses with regard to that particular building.
Well, that seems to be the problem, Frank. I mean, you know, is NEMA really at fault, or is it a question of just too much legislation? Because it seems developers, homeowners, and regulators are all reading from different scripts, and everybody has a particular legislation or a particular act backing up what they're saying. Particularly, for example, here, there's the 1969 Survey Act governing the conduct and the standards of survey of riparian land. And among the issues here is that, you know, a riparian land is one that is of not less than 30 meters above the high water mark. Questions are being asked. Whose mandate is it to determine the high water mark for this riparian land? Is it the mandate of the homeowner, the mandate of the developer, or the mandate of the regulator?
It's actually true what you're saying, that there is too much law and too much enforcement bodies with regard to development in Kenya. Of course, off the cuff, you have to deal with the Department of City Planning and Enforcement, Nairobi City Council. Nairobi City Council, in the enforcement of their notices with regard to development, also have a hand in telling you whether you're building next to riparian land or not. Of course, there's NCA, and we know that NCA are supposed to monitor all through the development to ensure that you are building or putting up that development in accordance with the law. There is NEMA. NEMA is supposed to ensure that the environment impact assessment was put up, published, and that whatever is being done has been done after public participation has taken place with regard to MCA Act. Then, of course, there is the WARMA that is mandated under the Water Act, and the list goes on. The problem is that there are too many laws and too many people who are supposed to enforce these laws, yet no one seems to enforce it the way it's supposed to be done.
All right. Let me bring in Henry Ochieng here. He's the CEO of the Kenya Alliance of Resident Associations. A lot has been said on matters demolition, but let's talk about you know, the view of the resident associations themselves. NEMA now says it wants to embark on public education to inform Kenyans about the legal needs before building or putting down a building and before buying a house at the same time. Your take on what's been unfolding with Seefer Apartments?
I think that is a good move, but coming a little bit too late, because ideally one of the roles for NEMA is to make sure that people have the right information and there's proper public awareness and education. But the kind of confusion we are seeing regarding this particular issue is an indication that our institutions within government are not working, are not reading from the same page. We have too many institutions doing more or less the same thing. We have too many laws addressing the same issue. And what we need to look at, even over and above the issue of public awareness and education, is to first of all harmonize the laws that pertain to this issue of riparian land, so that we have one clear law and coordinated legislation that can give a proper direction in terms of what is to be done. We also need to have a more coordinated approach in terms of the various institutions. You can see that we are talking about NEMA and WARMA having said that they want to demolish the Seefer Apartment because they are on riparian land. The county government is saying something contrary. So what this means is that even the process of getting approvals for development is not well coordinated, and you have different institutions giving different views. So we need to ensure that we have a one-stop kind of shop in terms of approval process, and we must ensure that when somebody is seeking to put up a development, they don't have to get kind of confused response from different institutions. So there's need for that kind of coordination and harmonization of the process. But I think the aspect of awareness and education is also very key, because some of the people who have invested in this particular development perhaps didn't have the right information in terms of what to look out for before they put their investment. So we need to go out very actively and very aggressively to ensure that we have proper education and awareness, not just on the law, but also on the various process that people need to follow, up to the point where you can be able to be comfortable that this is a good place to invest. It's interesting that the people like NEMA and WARMA and even the county government are now talking about demolition. Before anybody occupies a particular development, you must have occupation certificate provided by the government. So are we saying that the government provided occupation certificate for this particular development without appreciating that it had some issues? Or are we saying that somebody deliberately looked the other way without ensuring that proper procedures are followed? So what we are dealing with here is, one, the government not working in a coordinated way, and number two, maybe particular officers who might have been compromised, particular officers who are not doing their role and not enforcing the law to ensure that the right thing is done. On this particular issue, perhaps we need to step back and let the various institutions dig deeper in terms of investigation and confirm exactly what happened and where the problem is, because it appears that even the government itself cannot be able to say in a very clear way whether this particular development is on riparian land or not, if you go by what the county government is talking about.
Right.
So a number of issues that need to be looked at.
But how can the Kenyan homeowner, anybody looking to buy a home, protect themselves? It was a question we were asking earlier. What should a homeowner keep in mind before committing their money? Because we've been speaking to Peter Otieno there, the chairman of the Seefer Flats homeowners, and he says the majority of the tenants or the residents at Seefer Apartments are not the original buyers. They're not the same people who bought from the developer. These are guys who bought from the homeowners who bought from the developers, which makes it a bit tricky. So where do they begin in terms of making sure they're signing the right documents and the homes they're investing in are safe?
Actually, the beginning point is the issue about public education and awareness. So people need to be sensitized on what exactly to look out for in terms of before you invest in any development. But again, it also becomes tricky because when a developer produces documents that show that they had all the approvals and they're able to confirm that the government actually was able to give all the necessary approval for the development, then it also becomes difficult for an investor to be able to determine whether the documents are authentic or not. So it's actually what I could call a catch-22 situation, where the capacity of the person who wants to invest to determine the authenticity of the document might not be up to what is required. But again, the people who are supposed to protect the investor themselves are actually appearing to be the ones who don't even have the right information or don't even know whether the development is in the riparian land or not. So I think at the end of the day, what we need to invest on very aggressively is to ensure that we provide the right information, we sensitize the public, and we make sure that people are very clear on what exactly to be able to understand or to know before they make that decision to invest in a particular development.
All right, many thanks for speaking to us. That is Henry Ochieng, the CEO of the Kenya Alliance of Resident Associations. We've also been speaking to Frank Waluke, who is an environment lawyer, Amina Mahmoud, a real estate consultant with Rama Homes, as well as our lead reporter, Sophia Nuna, giving us the latest. This is the big story tonight. The wave of demolitions in the country continues, the latest being Seefer Apartments, that demolition order being extended for 30 more days by the National Environment and Management Authority. That is the big story tonight. Many thanks for watching. My name is Michelle Ngele Odhiambo. Good night.